This is from Yahoo, right? Yeah, this is from Yahoo. A little bit, again, not so much on like the JavaScript side, but they definitely go into the components and the forms and everything. You see they have menus and stuff like that. Good stuff. So basically these are, they're one-stop shops, right? They include everything, all the things. You got to have all the things now. If you don't have your reset, your type, your grid, and a couple other things, then you're basically non-existent. Or if you're a hipster front-end framework, you're like, I know we're too cool for that kind of thing. I don't know. And a lot of these go beyond the static stuff, right? They include behavioral things, like all those plugins and stuff like that. You want a popover, you want a tooltip, you want a modal, you want a carousel, things moving and flying across the screen. We got that. All these things got that. It's pretty cool. But how did we get here? How did we get to today? Clever girl. Another Jurassic Park reference. I don't know. I was thinking about Jurassic Park. I watched it the last week. Sorry. So what led us to today? Why do we have these kind of really large frameworks? And I'll get to the tomorrow stuff soon. We're getting there. So a while ago, CSS kind of evolved. How many people really love first of all, really love CSS? How many people love CSS? How many people think they understand CSS? All right. I'm with you. Yeah, kind of. So CSS changed, right? Designers. How many designers are in the room? There's probably tons upstairs. Let's get them on here. All right, cool. Designers kind of came in and took CSS and said, CSS is pretty cool. We can make some stuff with CSS. And so I don't have any screenshots of it, but did you guys see that Coke can made out of CSS? Or Homer Simpson made out of CSS? Like CSS kind of became like an art, and all these designers were just like, holy crap, CSS is cool. And so we had all this really like artsy-fartsy stuff done with CSS, and we took that and we actually made it practical, right? We took all these awesome things that we could do when we said, hey, let's actually build like these things that we can use and make money off of it, and do awesome things. So, and then the scope of CSS increased. We went from just resets to these full-blown frameworks. We went from grids to responsive grids. We went from type experiments to full-blown like type scales and everything like that, right? Most importantly, people just wanted to work smarter though. Repetition. That sucks. You don't want to be doing these things all over again. You want like a nice starting point. You just want to dive in. You want to be good to go. Another thing changed. Documentation turned into style guides. I'll use the example, not to throw them under the bus, it was just a different time and a different audience, is the YUI grids. That was way geared towards developers and not much to designers, not that much to people who had little to no experience building on the web, right? And so you had this style guide approach. And what I mean by a style guide basically is something like Bootstraps and Foundations, and probably every other framework's examples now. When you go in their documentation, you say, oh, I need a navigation thing. Well, here's an example of it, and here's the code for it. That's like the bread and butter of a style guide. You tell people this is what it is, this is how you use it, and this is why it's pretty freaking cool. These three things all contributed to that. Web inspector tools, being able to just right-click and say, basically, tell me what this thing does and how it's made, right? That's really powerful, and these live examples became a must. Like if you have a front-end framework and you don't have any examples, you're not showing people what it does, guarantee you no one's going to use it. It's just going to be really hard to get started, right? And another awesome thing, all these are learning tools. Style guides are a great way, and these documentation now, it's a great way to bring people up to speed, whether it's an internal style guide, if it's an internal product, an internal design framework, or if it's an external one, right? It's great for beginners, it's great for people who have no idea what they're doing to just open it up, move some things around, and then go and inspect the code and learn how to do it. That's how I got started. I got started writing HTML and CSS in Notepad with GeoCities, and I remember changing for the first time my link color, and I lost my shit. It was awesome. I flipped my table. No, I didn't flip the table. It was a really heavy desk, and it had like one of those really heavy, tall tower PCs and the giant CRT. There's no way I could flip that. Anyway. More people. This is the last thing I think that really changed front-end frameworks. That's how we got here. Holy crap, there are a lot of people building stuff on the internet. There's a lot of people here, too. And as I like to say, hella nerds. This is what we say in California. By the way, I'm from California. I'm not really from California, but I came here from California today. Yesterday, actually. But anyway, there's a lot of people building stuff on the web, and you're all really awesome and talented. And everyone's from different backgrounds, and so everyone wants to get started. They don't want to... like I said before, they don't want to have to recreate everything from scratch. They want that turnkey solution. That's a crappy term, but everyone, I think, kind of understands it. You just want to plug and go, right? So you just want to get started. There's no more of that kind of blank canvas. If you work in Photoshop, we have the blank canvas kind of problem. On the web, it's the new page tab problem, new tab problems. Like, okay, I've got this now. What the hell do I do, right? Frameworks kind of help with that a lot. And the last part about it is community. There's all these kind of communities. right? Example. And all these things kind of sprung up, and all these people are working together, and they're collaborating, they're building these awesome things. It all came together, and it's pretty awesome stuff. All right, tomorrow. By the way, I'm sweating bullets up here because I'm kind of nervous, but also it's just really warm up here, so I apologize if I'm gross. Anyway, tomorrow's coming up real quick. As I said, this time thing's kind of hard. We're more at dusk than anything else. Like, we're basically there at tomorrow. And as web workers, as developers, designers, like I said before, we're doing some really awesome stuff, all right? So what are we in the midst of? What are we seeing? What's changing as we have these mega frameworks, these comprehensive frameworks? What are we going towards, right? This is like the tomorrow stuff, then we're gonna get to the next week stuff. The next week stuff is where I'm gonna lose my shit and I'm gonna get really excited too. And I'll flip this table. So what's happening is there's kind of an increased focus on customization for all these frameworks. And there's a couple of examples of that, right? So, and it manifests in two different ways, I think. The first and foremost is customizer tools, right? Every framework basically is built on a preprocessor now, and I'll get to that actually a little bit later. But it's really easy to, on Bootstrap, for example, to say, oh, I don't need everything from Bootstrap, I only want a couple of things. So you can go through here, uncheck a couple of the options, the components you don't think you're gonna need, or the ones that you don't want, scroll down the bottom, hit, grab and go, basically. And that makes it really easy because some people don't really need all these things. They don't need the technical aspect, but it's a really important part of building with frameworks now is to get it all down to just what you need, because why have everything that you don't need, right? If you're not gonna use any of the form styles, don't include them, right? Just make it tailored for yourself and your project. Another good example of that, this is the builder for Pure. I just took a screenshot of that today. But they have a nice little demo here, and you can go through and customize it completely and everything like that. It's pretty friggin' cool. Build it for yourself, tailor it for what you need. Frameworks that don't tailor themselves, I think, are gonna kind of go the way of the dodo bird, right? You need to be able to be flexible, and everyone's gonna wanna use these in their own ways. And that's why they're so powerful. The second aspect of customization is theming. This is a flat UI. This is built on Bootstrap, and these guys, Design Moto, made it. But there's themes being built on these frameworks, on Bootstrap, on Foundation, and a bunch of other ones too. And that boggles my mind. People are making money and building marketplaces on these things. There are entire companies that make themes on top of these frameworks. And it's kind of a lot like the WordPress community, where you have all these blogs, and you just swap out the theme, and all of a sudden you've got this awesome looking site, right? The same goes for all these frameworks. And we're gonna see a lot more of these as we go forward. There's more and more themes. I see new ones every day, and they're all looking pretty good. Next thing, while we have these gigantic frameworks, there's also a little bit of a backlash, or not necessarily backlash, but criticism. And so we're seeing more and more people still focusing on these simpler tools. One tool, one job, and you can put it basically everywhere, right? And there's a lot of criticisms for why you'd want this, right? Oh, this thing is too big, it's too bloated, everyone's using it, everything looks the same. So I'm just gonna make this one thing, it does this one thing, it does this one thing really freaking well. So here are a couple of examples and why I think they're important, because these things all tie together in the next thing that I'm gonna talk about. First up is normalize. This basically took over for Eric Meyer's reset. Instead of nuking everything, we just say, oh, we need to normalize everything. This thing's got a bug, this browser, the idea behind normalize is actually to make it irrelevant, right? So these guys, they do all these things, they document all these bugs and differentiations between browsers, and the idea is to go to the browser and say, hey, fix your broke stuff so that people don't have to worry about this, right? And so this is made by Nicholas and John, and that's basically that's their goal. But this is one tool, and they do it really frickin' well, and it saves a lot of time for us who are using it in our frameworks. Another type of tool is responsive grids, or just any grid system, right? So many grid systems are out there, and even ones that are built into actually these big frameworks, or just grid systems. Hey, you don't need a big framework, you just need a grid, and you can use it yourself, and I'll get to why that's actually really important. Another one, Font Awesome. All these icon fonts, there's tons of them. There's Font Awesome, there's Intypo, there's Glyphicons, which we use in Bootstrap, and then there's 4 more that I have no idea what the names are, but I've got pictures of those sites in my head. That doesn't help you, but a quick Google search will. And the last one is Animate. This is made by Dan Eden. This is just a way to put all these things together to make animations. So if you want something to flash or bounce or shake, or I don't know what Tada does. I don't really remember. Anyone know what Tada does? I have no idea, but it sounds cool. But anyway, there's all these really focused tools, and the idea is you take all these tools and you put them together and you get what I'm going to call a compilation framework. And that sounds like, actually maybe that sounds pretty simple. I thought I was going to say it sounds complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. And the way we're going to explain it is with some math. But it's not hard math, it's not calculus. So you take your normalize, you take some typography, throw a grid system on it, sprinkle a preprocessor on it, maybe add some JavaScript plugins, and boom, you got a framework. It's not that easy necessarily, but that kind of explains how these things are going, and it explains basically how all these frameworks are made today. One example of it that I haven't brought up before is 320 and up. This is made by Andy Clark. I think they're still maintaining it, but under a different name. They built their own thing. It's got HTML5 boilerplate in there, which includes normalize. And then they included Bootstrap's buttons, form styles, and table styles, and they built extra stuff on top of that as well. And this was one of the first mobile-first frameworks that really lit that fire, which was pretty cool. So this is a compilation framework. It's pretty cool. Bootstrap's also kind of a compilation framework. It's not in the sense that it had every single one of those things on that math sheet, that math cheat sheet. But it's got normalized, and it's got an icon font library from Glyphicons, and we put all that stuff together, and we wrote our own things, and we put the preprocessor in there, and we put the grid system in there, and we mix it all together, and boom, we have our compilation framework, right? We're going to see a lot more of these. Foundation does the same thing. They've got normalized in there. I think they got normalized. I think they're moving to normalize. But then they've got the preprocessor as well. They've got their icon font, everything like that. You put all these aspects together, all these individual tools, like the things we had from yesterday, and we're building new things with them, and it's pretty freaking awesome. Another thing we're going to see, frameworks dedicated to the mobile web. How many people here think mobile's important? Good. Yay! Extra credit for everybody. I'm in teacher mode now. There's so much opportunity here, and people that are building stuff for the mobile web, whether it's either just responsive or mobile, they want all the same awesomeness that's on desktop, right? And that's really important because there's so many people who use mobile stuff on the internet. And so they have a lot of the same problems and goals. They want to standardize style and behavior, right? Because the differences between Android and iOS, and even between iOS 6 and 7 or 5 and 6 or anything like that, there's some differences there, right? We need to work together to standardize these things so we can focus on just making awesome stuff happen. There's so much opportunity for advanced things here too. The amount of support for CSS3 and HTML5 things in mobile Safari is just ridiculous, and it's really good at these things, like Flexbox animations, using all the sorts of stuff that we use on the desktop for performance reasons and everything like that, gradients, box shadows, rounded corners, all sorts of awesome stuff. And there's a good example of this. This thing's called Ratchet, and it's a framework that's made by a couple buddies of mine. They're working on V2 right now, but the first version here is basically a way to prototype iPhone apps, and it's built it's kind of like Bootstrap, but just for your phone, right? They've got the nav bar, like you see on iOS. They've got buttons. They've got lists, like the table UI view or whatever. And that's just a way to really quickly build things in the browser rather than spending all your time in Photoshop, right? And I'm going to get to that a little bit more too. The end goal is native, but it's all in the mobile browser. Kind of related is Framer. Has anyone used Framer here? Framer.js? Framer.js is actually really cool. It's a way for prototyping, and they say desktop and mobile, but all the examples I think are basically geared towards mobile. Basically, you prototype all your mobile apps, and it's really freaking awesome to do. And they've got a lot of awesome documentation and previews and things like that. It's geared just towards building mobile things, and we're going to see a lot more of those. A lot more mobile frameworks to solve these problems of designing and developing. I mentioned before preprocessors, and I'm sorry I'm talking real fast. Is everyone okay with how fast I'm talking? Sometimes I need to stop because like I said, I'm losing my stuff up here. Anyway, preprocessors, they're really cool. There's two really big ones, Less and Sass. Sass is probably the bigger one than Less, but you get all these awesome things with them, with both. There's not really an advantage to either or. They have a lot of the same functionality. And preprocessors, they're coming at you in a couple different ways too. One of them is with these variable and mixin libraries. Preboot is this thing that I made before Bootstrap, and it's basically just variables and mixins. So if you don't want any of the components from Bootstrap, you just want to be able to use some of the same tools, you got all that right here. So if you don't want to write out all the prefixed versions of box shadows or whatever, just include a mixin and you're good to go. If you're not of the Sass or the Less variety, you want Sass, well, there's this thing called Bourbon, and they do a lot of the same thing too. It's pretty awesome. Has anybody not used a preprocessor? A couple of folks, all right, no need to be shy. The main advantage to them and why they're important to frameworks is mixins, I think, first and foremost. And that includes variables and stuff like that too. But the idea with these preprocessors is that you declare a class, right? You have your button, and we do this in Bootstrap. It's .btn, right? and then you can use it anywhere else. So if you don't want to use all of our versions, you can build on the actual the scaffolding elements of these frameworks. And so you can just mix in it and say, oh, my custom button, call to action, and then you just say dot button and you include the parentheses so you get the nice syntax line or whatever. That's a mix-in, and that's just going to say, take all the button styles and put them in there. And that's really freaking awesome and really important because it allows you to extend frameworks. And it allows you to extend frameworks in ways that the people that created the frameworks didn't really intend to on the outset, right? I have no idea how you could use Bootstrap in an entirely different way without actually using any of the pre-built components, and that's really cool. Those variables and mix-ins are so important. It makes building these frameworks actually really easy because you're going to use things like colors and fonts and things all over the place, different values. And if you only set those once and then you have a variable that you just use everywhere, it's a lot better than global find and replace because find and replace, it's pretty cool, but it can also lead to a lot of problems. Error handling is probably the best part about a preprocessor, and that's why building frameworks is, I think it's partly why building frameworks is actually possible, because instead of having no styles when you screw up your CSS, it'll actually say, oh, you screwed up on this line because you did this. And it's like, thanks, Sass. Thanks, Les. That's really helpful. Sass, for the record, Sass is actually better, I think, at error handling than Les is. But build tools like Grunt and things like that can actually help with that. So that's really cool. And to think where the frameworks are going to go from this with all these preprocessors, I have no idea, but it's going to be pretty freaking exciting. How many people write JavaScript here? Most of you. I don't know anything about JavaScript. I mean, barely anything. I write a little bit of jQuery. And so when we added all these plugins to Bootstrap, and like we've seen a lot of other people do this with different ways that you do it, but people are going to write less JavaScript, and that's what all these frameworks are about. They enable people to do things without actually having to write JavaScript. Because JavaScript is confusing, especially to designers. It might not be to you, but it's confusing to me. So you don't need to write JavaScript, you just write data attributes. It's just like writing HTML, and then you add your CSS and it's good to go. It's abstracted behavior. 2 examples, one from Bootstrap. Foundation does the same thing as well, I think. But if you want to drop down, like we have 2 examples here in the nav bar and in your tabs, all you really need to do is include this data toggle equals dropdown, and this markup for the dropdown. You write your markup and you add the toggle, and you're good to go as long as the JavaScript's included. You don't need to write the JavaScript to trigger it. You just include that, and you click, and you get your dropdown. Ta-da! It's really cool. At GitHub, we have our own style guide too, and we have another good example. Instead of data attributes, we use prefixed classes. So anything that's JS-something is a class we use for behavioral things. It's divorced from style, which is a really good thing to do. So if you want to like do a show more, which just toggles hidden content, you just add JS details container and JS details target, and then we do some crazy foo for you, and you can just click buttons and show and hide stuff, and it's really cool. And this is awesome for frameworks because people who have no idea what they're doing can do things. And I like that because I have no idea what I'm doing. And to run another point home real quick, this is how you dismiss things in Bootstrap, right? You can dismiss a modal, or you can dismiss an alert. And you notice it's the exact same. And that's pretty cool. Actually, both of those are the exact same. Yeah, so we have a close button there, and all you have to worry about is the data dismiss. And you just tell it what you want to dismiss. You want to dismiss your modal, or you want to dismiss your alert. And that's it. Boom, behavior. All right. Next week, this is the good stuff. This is where I get pretty excited. I'm probably going to talk faster and maybe a little bit higher pitched. But start off with an easy one. There's going to be a lot more frameworks built in-house. How many people are working on a framework at their company right now? Yeah. How many people don't think they are, but you probably are once you think about it? Yeah, there we go. Yes. Everyone's doing this, whether they realize it or not. We did it at Twitter with Bootstrap. Before it was Bootstrap, it was called the Twitter Blueprint. And like I said, I made this for an internal tool. We had a tool that we needed. It was an admin tool. And I decided to make it not look like everything else. I wanted to make something that we could actually use and reuse and reuse and reuse. And so I made Blueprint. And it came out of building an actual product. And then we documented how we built that. And it kind of became this whole other thing, which just kind of blows my mind. And another example I mentioned before, the GitHub style guide. This is our style guide for all of most of our components that we use on github.com. And we've got everything in here, from styling in CSS to templates to behavioral for the JavaScript to like even how you write Ruby stuff, and even like a written style guide for like words and things like that. So it's pretty awesome to do this because, like I said before about style guides, this approach is really important because in-house frameworks are going to be kind of like the norm, and it's a great way to bring people up to speed. When I got hired at GitHub, I got to jump into the style guide and just kind of realize, oh, this is how we do these different things. That's really freaking important because I need to go to talk to like a dozen different people. I just went to this one document and learned all there is to know about it, basically. And it made it really easy to dive into the code. We're going to see a lot more frameworks from products, and I think, so we have Bootstrap, which came from Twitter, and Foundation came from all the stuff at Zerb, from working on the sites that we worked on there. They did a couple of iterations after I had left and worked on that, and that became Foundation. I think Airbnb is actually working on their own one too. I know of it, but I haven't seen it. I've only heard things. I like hearing things though, so that's kind of cool. But again, it's all about learning, and hopefully we see more people open sourcing these things because I think it's going to be really powerful. Media queries for components. How many people write media queries? Media queries are pretty cool, right? They're all right. I think they suck. And I'm going to tell you why with this tweet. Nicholas Gallagher, the guy that made Normalize, he tweeted this out. We need native CSS media queries at the element component level, widget level, not just the viewport. Make it so, internets. Guess what we did? Way to go, internet. Nicholas's buddy, John Neal, made a polyfill because this is right now just a W3C proposal, I believe. I don't think it's gone to spec yet. But the idea here is that instead of saying, oh, framework, do these things based on the viewport, like I'm on an iPhone, make it look like this, I'm on an iPad, make it look like this, I'm on a computer, make it look like this. Instead of that, it's saying, hey, thing, you're this, do this, right? And so when this widget is about 300 pixels wide, right, here's a basic example, change the font size to 14 pixels. And you can imagine building on this. When it's maybe maxed with 600 pixels, maybe you want to double the font size or something like that. This is really freaking powerful. I'm going to tell you a couple reasons why. Because it changes the responsive game, right? Instead of writing these bits on the viewports, because viewports are kind of tough to design around, we've kind of done it now, and we kind of put up with it, but I think it could be a lot better. And then you have to deal with pixel density and things like that, but it makes it all about the content, not about the device, right? So if a good example, the way to describe this is actually with ads. And so I'm sorry if I'm just talking about ads again, but this moves outside of frameworks too, which is why it's so cool. But if you have an ad, you've got like the wide like banners, the leaderboard ad, and then you have like the medrecs is what they're called, like the big square ones. Imagine if that's only one set of code. And you just say, oh, when it's this size, display it this way. When it's this size, display it this way. That's really freaking awesome because all of a sudden you have responsive ads. And I'm sorry if I just ruined everybody's lives with another ad like platform, like ad revenue monetization strategy. But it's pretty freaking cool. And it's going to work with frameworks too, because we have all these components like carousels, like navigation components, nav bars, grids, and everything else like that. This is how we're going to build these things. We're going to build it around the content and less about the viewport. And I think it's really powerful. Last one. This is the good one. Designing native apps on the web. How many people design their native apps in the browser now? All right, you guys are ahead of the curve. Way to be. All right. Frameworks are leading the way, I think, towards web-based design and development, right? Instead of doing it all in Photoshop or Sketch, we're doing it all in browser, and it's becoming actually practical. Frameworks, and I want to talk briefly about frameworks and this ultimate design and development tool. We kind of have one today. It's called Photoshop. This is the ultimate design tool. It's not, right? I mean, it's not. Because Photoshop kind of sucks, right? Screw Photoshop. Nobody wants to work in Photoshop and make static things all the time, right? The ultimate design tool, and I'm going to tie this together hopefully just in a sec here. The ultimate design tool is called the web, right? The ultimate design development tool is your friggin' browser. Everything that's on the internet is basically part of the ultimate design tool, right? Because the web is a fully loaded toolbox. Everything that you need to build something and make something awesome is all on the web, whether it's a framework, whether it's a simple tool like Normalize, whether it's something like Jetstrap or Webflow, which allows you to have these crazy WYSIWYG editors to make sites. These are all different tools, right? Instead of Photoshop's little palettes and toolboxes and crazy freaking huge menus, basically you have a lot of tabs, right? And the URL bar, and that's how you get stuff done. Those are your tools as a web designer and developer, right? And frameworks are just another set of those tools. And like I said, they make design in the browser practical. things like Ratchet and Framer, and this other thing I'm getting there, make it possible to move just from like designing these things and then building them really freaking fast and really freaking well. This is a prototype of a Mac app, and I got permission from my coworker Steve Smith to show this just ever so slightly, and I'm going to take it away real quick. I'll tell you real quick. That was all built in HTML and CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. And what's really freaking awesome about that thing, I'll go back to it for you real quick. What's really freaking awesome about this is all live data. This is all live stuff. This is all real data. These are all real commits from GitHub for GitHub. And he pulled these all together with some HTML and CSS, with Spine, and a couple other things. He built his own freaking framework to build a friggin' Mac app in a friggin' browser. And that just blows my mind. And we don't have this, it's not open sourced yet, but I have a feeling someone's going to build it. Maybe I will, I don't know, maybe I won't, I don't know, maybe you will. But Steve Smith, he made this, and he gave a presentation about the technical details called Designing with the Web. You can look it up, it's on Speaker Deck. But the idea is you take HTML and CSS, and you take a couple of fancy like JavaScript things, and you put it all together, and you've got a compilation framework, and all of a sudden, you're doing all your design and development in browser, and frameworks are making this possible. He built his own framework and actually just did it all and used real live data from an API. He just makes an API request, gets it all in JSON, puts it in there, and all of a sudden, he's got diffs and commits and everything else like that, and my mind is blown. And it's pretty freaking cool. And we're going to see the same thing for mobile, right? With using things like Ratchet and with Framer. We're using frameworks and all these tools that are leading to newer and better and stronger frameworks, and we're basically solving all of our problems. At least that's the intent, right? And so that's how I lost my shit, basically. That was pretty awesome. I remember when Steve showed this at GitHub, and everyone was just like and that's how they reacted, right? That's how I reacted. I had no words. It was pretty crazy. But that's where frameworks are going. That's where frameworks, I think, are going. And to sum it up real quick, like what's going on here? Almost done here, and then we'll do some questions. Frameworks changed the web, and they're doing it again, right? Frameworks made it possible for Steve to go through and build that entire freaking Mac app in the browser. All the drop-down menus work, all the buttons work, all the different views work. There's even system preferences for the application. You do the little shortcut, and you get your system preferences. And it's like, what? That's crazy. And these more tools means more frameworks. Whether you're building them at the office, whether you're making compilation frameworks, if someone else is doing it, it's coming, it's happening, and we're just going to get better and be more excited about building stuff on the internet, right? Responsive content instead of the viewport. Make it all about the content. Content is king. There's tons of articles about it. That's what the beauty about frameworks is don't necessarily make it just about like building for the viewport, but really hone in on your content. That's more important than anything else. Don't just try to shoehorn things together. Make it about the content. Design and developing for the native platforms, whether it's for mobile, native mobile or native desktop, all really important, and I think that's where things are going to be going even further as you just start to prototype your butts off, basically, with all these front-end frameworks. Super exciting stuff. And that's basically all I got for you. Thanks. Any questions? It's okay if you don't. What's up?
How do you see the workflow getting increasingly complicated with like processors and GitHub and frameworks? They make our life easier for like to get a new colleague. Not that advanced yet. For them, it's like a really high bar.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we tackle the complications from these workflows basically growing larger and larger, right? I think a lot of it depends on how your team does things, right? And that's what makes documentation so important. And that's why these style guides and this way of making documentation ever more interactive and useful to people is why that's like the focal point or a focal point of frameworks. Having good documentation and like the distributed nature of the internet, 70% of GitHub's 200 or so people are basically remote people, actually. And so everything happens in chat, and it's all about how your workflows happen, how your communication happens at your company, right? So if you can build around that, I think a lot of your problems are just kind of going to resolve themselves. A lot of it still is going to revolve into or dissolve into, actually like person-to-person conversations. But as long as you document as much as you can, then hopefully you're in good shape. So, anyone else? There's a couple of things. You, sir. Ooh, we got mics.
So hi, my name is Sebastian. What do you think about making frameworks more micro-component based? And I will make a small example. Just imagine you want to display the state of a user in a line using a label, and actually you want to say that he felt in love or his state is in love. So you have to use the label danger for making a red label writing inside he's felt in love. Why not just using label red instead?
So the reason why we don't use label red versus label danger is basically I don't want to build things that are tied to the display necessarily. Like some of those we do. Like we have utility classes in Bootstrap, like pull left, pull right, and stuff like that, and that maps really clearly to float left and right. But when it comes to like colors and using colors, I want to try to help people use them as wisely as they can. And so tying them to semantic or contextual settings is actually really important for us. And we try to do that throughout the entire framework, right? So your labels, your buttons, your alerts, your panels, all those things have all those shared classes for, hey, if it's red, then hopefully maybe it means something that's kind of dangerous, or it's maybe really important. Or if it's a warning, that's why it's yellow, you call attention to it. If it's successful, that's why we show green. All those colors just kind of have those associations. And for us, we're pushed towards more of the semantics than just the colors, because I think that those are more useful to people.
And then one last question, why did you use Spine in this application that you were showing us?
I think that Steve's the one that actually made all that, and he's the one that put it together. And I think his choice, he just looked at a couple of them, and he liked the way that one worked with his particular workflow. And I know there's tons of them out there that you could probably do similar things with, and that's what makes it the beauty of a compilation framework is you can probably do all the same thing with an entirely different tool set and still make really awesome stuff, right? That's why this stuff's so powerful.
Thanks.
Yep. One over there. Wait for the mic. Yeah.
Hi. Great speech, by the way.
Thank you.
Do you see it as the job of the platform vendors to make their native platforms understand JavaScript, or do you see it as the job of the rest of the world to create web-based JavaScript tools to help you author native and platform-locked applications? And I'm not sure. I heard about. I loved the slide you showed with your screenshot until you said even the preference pane elements were in JavaScript, which for me was again platform lock-in, so you couldn't have that code run on a Linux or a Windows machine, or even on a mobile device with enough power. So how do you see that gap?
I think we're going to continue to have tools built for both situations, right? You're going to have people that can make all these things on the actual native tools, right? If you have like Quartz Composer or something like that, or if you're just going to do it all in Xcode, that's definitely possible, and that's something you can do. I think the beauty of doing it all in browser is that for the most part, it's really easy to get something up very quickly, especially since there are so many more, I think there are way more web developers and mobile web developers than there are native developers. And that whole audience solving all these problems together as one large community is hopefully giving people an advantage that they have to go through it just really quickly. I've done a couple of them myself. I remember we did the launch for New Twitter, which came out 2 years ago. And we had to basically rebuild our iOS client and our Android client to do screenshots because we needed to localize all the strings so they were available in different languages. And so we did all that. And the way we did that is basically we recreated both apps in one set of HTML and CSS. And we just swapped out all the assets to make it look like iOS versus Android with a single class on the body. And that actually was like a good example of why it depends on the context and what you're trying to do with it, basically. But either direction is good. I think we're going to still see the bifurcation of that. People are going to do it one way, people are going to do it another way. But I think that using JavaScript in front end is actually probably the more powerful way. Anyone else? Wait for the mic. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you. I'm sorry. All right, this is the last question. But if you have other ones, come find me afterwards, especially for the stickers, because I know that's what you really want.
You mentioned people use frameworks in like new and unexpected ways, like with Bootstrap.
Yeah.
Do you think the responsibility lies with the framework developers or the users to protect themselves against breakages, like when fixes are made or new versions come out?
I think most of the responsibility, if we're going to do bug fixes or patches or new releases, most of the responsibility is on us as people that make the frameworks, right? Obviously, if you are just upgrading to a patch release, a bug fix, and everything breaks, obviously we screwed up doing something. That's my first thought on that is actually that we did a poor job communicating something that you didn't expect. Patches and bug fixes should not do that. The idea is you don't break anything, right? You just work around that. You shouldn't add new features. You shouldn't break anything that causes problems with backwards compatibility. It all depends on the type of release. With Bootstrap 3, we use the major releases like 2.0 and 3.0 to rewrite everything and basically reset based on the last months, 6 months, year worth of thinking and thought that's gone into the community and how we build these things. And so for those, you're kind of going to have to expect that things break, right? Not everything is backward compatibility. And on the web, things move so quickly, it's important for those things to stay that way, to keep moving the web forward. But as long as we can clearly communicate these things, it's definitely on us. And working together, I think it's really easy for the community to come together and help each other out with that kind of stuff too. So, yeah. Can we do one more? All right, one quick more.
So, how does your design process look today, not tomorrow, not next week? What kind of tools you're actually using?
How does my design process look? I think every designer that you ask, you'll get a different answer for that. I think a lot of people still spend a lot of time. A lot of people sketch things out and then they'll jump right into code. A lot of people sketch things out and they'll jump into Photoshop and then into code. I think most importantly, the most important aspect of it is that you're building something that's interactive so you can get through interactions. Because really when people are using your products and using these frameworks, what matters most is actually those interactive elements, going from one stage to another, one page to another, right? So those things got to flow really seamlessly. And if you're not designing those or building those in the context of a browser, you're probably going to miss a lot of nuances because of that, right? So my workflow basically is I sketch things and I jump right into code. But that's mostly because I'm working in Bootstrap and I know that and I'm working on it and I know all the components and I can just jump right into that. Same goes with working on GitHub.com. I know a lot of things that I can just do there. Sometimes I get to the point where it's frustrating. I can't do things with the code because of the Rails views and I'm not that comfortable in there necessarily when I have to mess around with controls or whatever. But then I'll just take a screenshot, jump into Photoshop, cut things up, and I think a lot of people work the same way, right? But we have all these different tools, and we can just do them all in different ways. So, cool. All right, that's it. 15-minute break, and then next talk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks, everybody. Remember, stickers.
All right, guys, you're going to have 15 minutes break. You have time to get refreshments or change the room. The next talks will be on top design, be friends with your designers and style guides, and with Rodney Rame, copying with the broken web. Thank you.
Because most of the things you need. So take one.
Yes. Mark mentioned it. It's quite warm here inside. We're trying our best to